So I am absolutely delighted to have this panel here with us today. We're going to let themselves introduce themselves in a little bit. But what I thought I'd do just to kick off so you all understand why we're here today is we're really here to talk about the clinical implementation of precision medicine. And when you think about the implementation of precision medicine, many healthcare organizations are adopting precision medicine right now. And we've heard about a lot of the interesting technologies earlier today, the new diagnostic technologies, new biopharma drugs that are coming out. But really, when the health systems think about precision medicine, they're thinking about different issues. They're thinking about how to differentiate against competitors. They're thinking about clinical trials and getting patients on. They're thinking about the reimbursement landscape. But of course, all of these health systems face difficulties in the real-world implementation of precision medicine. So they face an uphill battle with electronic medical records and other technology that doesn't really support the real-world implementation. And what you're going to hear from is a set of panelists who work on the real-world implementation of precision medicine. And one of the challenges faced is this challenge that we all know about, which is the massive issue of the lack of visibility of genomic and molecular data in a clinical workflow. So when a physician actually wants to utilize molecular genomic testing technology, they're often left with a fax. They're left with this beautiful genomic data that has been reduced to a piece of paper that's been sent over the transit. So this is one of the issues that we deal with today, and one of the things that we'll talk about, how to really leverage data to enable precision medicine. And we at Syapse have the privilege of working with some of the fine folks on the stage in the context of the work that we do in enabling precision medicine through a software platform, in bringing together the relevant data to make precision medicine work, providing decision support at point of care, providing the clinical workflow that's needed for physicians to really act on this technology, and then most importantly, providing the technology to help do quality improvement and measure the impact of precision medicine. So we have a fine panel today, and what I'm going to do is actually just ask each panelist to start by introducing themselves and introducing what they do in precision medicine today, what their programs are like, and what their approach is to precision medicine. So what we'll do is we'll start with Dr. Nadauld.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here. And I guess to follow on John's introduction, my name is Nadauld. I'm at Intermountain Healthcare. And for those who may not know or be familiar with Intermountain, it is an integrated health delivery system headquartered in Salt Lake City and comprised of approximately 22 hospitals and 180 physician clinics, providing coverage to about 4 million lives throughout the Intermountain West and covering all of Utah and some of the surrounding states, including Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, etc. About 3 years ago at Intermountain, there was this understanding that genomics was becoming more and more clinically relevant, and some of the leadership at Intermountain understood that this would have an initial impact on oncology and then expand from there. And so in conversations with Intermountain leaders, ultimately we agreed that implementing a precision cancer genomics program might offer patients an opportunity to receive treatments and potentially have better outcomes than was available at the time. And so we launched Intermountain Precision Genomics, and the concept was that we would meet with patients who had advanced cancer, refractory cancer, who had failed standard therapy, offer them genomic profiling of their tumors, perform an in-depth interpretation of what the genomic results were, and then ultimately provide targeted therapies with the goal of then monitoring the outcomes of those patients to determine whether the outcomes of patients who received the precision medicine approach were any different than those who received standard therapies. And so that's what we've been doing for a couple of years now, and our outcomes data suggest that from a survival standpoint, progression-free survival, that those patients with advanced refractory cancers do in fact have a prolonged progression-free survival. One of the important concepts that we brought along through this whole analysis was the cost of care. And we own all of the data essentially for patients that are treated in our system. We can see when they go to an ER or seen in the clinic or get admitted to the hospital or the ICU. We know what the cost of their medicines are, and we found that the cost is very similar between a precision medicine approach and standard therapies. And so we're embarking now on making precision genomics available throughout the entire Intermountain healthcare system and more broadly. And looking forward to talking more about that.
Excellent. And next up, we have Kurbegov from Catholic Health Initiatives.
First, I have to say thank you, John, for saying the name right. It's always greatly appreciated.
It's several years of practice.
It really happens. I appreciate the opportunity to serve this panel. Catholic Health Initiatives, the organization that I work for, CHI, because I can't say Catholic Health Initiatives 10 times over throughout this talk, is large, in fact, the nation's third largest faith-based health system. Much of the work that I do is defined by our landscape as an organization. We are 105 hospitals and growing, and almost every time I give that number, it changes within a week. And we are essentially coast to coast from Washington State to Eastern Kentucky. As a large healthcare organization, it's been said that 17% of the U.S. population lives within an hour of a CHI facility. So it's a broad geography. We have a broad range of relationships with providers. We are not a closed system, so most of our oncology providers are independent. And so leveraging partnerships with independent docs come in all shapes and sizes and forms. As an organization, we're probably the youngest up here in terms of the commitment to precision medicine and the recognition that an organized approach to precision medicine will be of value. Again, it's a largely geographically diverse organization. Really, our goal is to be able to bring next generation technologies responsibly and rationally close to the places where our patients live. The reality for us is that the majority of our patients, whether they need to or not, are unlikely to leave their local communities. And so we have an obligation as a healthcare provider to be able to bring those technologies that can benefit individuals to the communities where they live. So we're relatively new in this effort, and really our goal is to be able to bring education, access, and actionability to the providers in the communities where they reside.
Next up is Thomas Moran, the Executive Director of Swedish Cancer Institute.
Well, John, I was going to follow Dax's lead and to thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. There you go. Again, good afternoon, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. Hopefully this will be interactive. I wanted to also describe a little bit about my institution. My name is Thomas Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Swedish Cancer Institute. Many times in international meetings, I'll be asked what neighborhood of Stockholm we're located in. And actually, the answer is we're a 5-hospital system in the greater Seattle area, the greater Puget Sound area. And the Swedish Cancer Institute is interesting in that, first of all, Swedish as a health system was founded in 1910, obviously by leaders of the Swedish community in the Seattle region. The Cancer Institute was founded in 1932, and actually was the first site delivering radiation therapy west of the Mississippi in the older Earth voltage days. We are a research practice. We have 9 multidisciplinary disease sites. We have a total of 200 members within our cancer center, and see approximately 8,000 new cancer patients annually. About 5,000 of those patients are analytic cases, that is, they've been diagnosed or first treated in our realm. When I arrived at Swedish in 2013, our first step was to begin a the concept we came up with is one of personalized medicine with a double meaning, a double entendre. On the one hand, caring for the whole patient in a holistic way. On the other, attending to biologic profiling, and we chose to start with NGS profiling of patients' tumors. And the other mantra that we had, which is very important, I think all of us at this conference appreciate, we didn't want perfection to be the enemy of progress. I mean, this is such a moving target for all of us, with such complexity and much uncertainty. You either get involved or not. So we chose to take an interesting path. First of all, we chose to develop an in-house genomics panel, and we recruited Dr. Anna Berry, who was previously the head of molecular pathology within the UCSF system, and she and some other talented physicians, Dr. Damden Shu, came together and interacting with the clinicians, put together a 68-item, quote-unquote, highly actionable gene alteration panel. Again, obviously using paraffin-embedded tissues. That was done in March of 2014. In the fall of 2014, we activated an IRB-approved registration protocol. And this protocol is interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, it relies on the clinicians to effectively order the NGS panel based on medical necessity. I'm looking at Suzanne as I say that. And then the protocol is simply a tool to observe, not prescribe, but observe how physicians use such information to make therapeutic decisions. And in fact, it requires that at least on an annual basis, there be an independent review of the patient's current clinical status in the context of their genomic profile. This protocol, the other unique feature is that we're aspiring to use it at the beginning of the patient's arc of experience with cancer. So we strive to basically do the molecular phenotyping on the patient's tumor as close to diagnosis as possible, to get, again, that context of the arc of the patient's experience. The next piece was the molecular tumor board, and Lincoln and his colleagues at Intermountain Health were very supportive of our system when we first started our molecular tumor board. That was over a year ago, in January of 2015. This meets every 2 weeks, and again is an important venue for communicating with the clinicians with molecular pathology expertise at hand. The last piece, and in some ways the most important, is the IT platform. And we are obviously working with Syapse. The notion is to have a platform that will bolt on to Epic, which is our EMR, throughout not only Swedish, but our affiliated organization, Providence Health and Services. We're a secular system in Swedish, but we are affiliated with Providence. And our program is gradually, organically growing in collaboration with other partners throughout Providence. The importance of the IT platform is also that it's linked. It's linked to our clinical trials management system, not only throughout Swedish, but ultimately throughout Providence. We have a common one system, it happens to be Velos. In addition, very importantly, this architecture is linked to the tumor registry. And the clinicians in the audience know that what identifies tumor registries in many ways is the cleanliness of the data, that it's been scrubbed and attended to, so it's very reliable. And again, this architectural platform allows us to collect the molecular phenotypic information, to organize it, and then analyze it in the context of the clinical data, the phenotypic data, if you will, that is within Epic. And I'll finish by saying that to date we've registered over 670 patients on our IRB-approved protocol. And again, this is a mechanism for really prospectively identifying physician behaviors. We have some strategic linkages with the Hutchinson Institute for Cancer Outcomes Research to evaluate the value proposition of this approach. And again, it's a very exciting time. Thank you.
Hi. I feel privileged to be here today, but also probably to say that I'm not sure that I'm up to the level of these gentlemen to my left here. They have health systems systems that really have, I think, provided some great leadership in this space and are doing some really innovative things. So first I'll tell you that I'm Suzanne Belinson. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Clinical Effectiveness at the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. What we're doing in precision medicine is we're trying to learn. And part of the reason why I was really excited to be here today was to actually be in a position where I could interact with these guys here and talk about some opportunities to collaborate. So let me tell you a little bit about why that even comes up for us. So a little bit about the structure of the association and the blue plans. I'm a sports fan, so I use a lot of sports analogies. The association is very similar to the NFL, right? We manage the cross and shield. We license the individual plans like the NFL licenses their teams. Beyond that, though, just like the NFL lets every team hire their own players, fire their own coaches, make their own plays, the association is the same way with our blue plans. They make their own coverage decisions. They operate within their local environment according to those local rules and principles. And so our role, and specifically the role of my team at the association, is to review the clinical evidence and publish evidence opinions that blue plans can use as they create their own local medical and coverage policies. Historically, our role has been one where the overwhelming majority of the work that we produce has been proprietary to the blue system. So we review the evidence, we put out a review to the blue plans then create their own local medical and coverage policies. As of October of last year, we launched a technology platform specifically aimed at increasing transparency and efficiency in the market around review of the evidence. Now, how does this have anything to do with precision medicine? Well, the way it has to do with precision medicine is precision medicine happens to be one of the areas in healthcare where there is a large amount of uncertainty. And gentlemen like the ones here to my left are creating and implementing programs within their hospital systems where they can try and start generating data to reduce uncertainty. My team lives to try and find data to reduce the uncertainty around medical technologies. And so we've now created an opportunity where we actually can have direct engagement with stakeholders, whether that's manufacturers, whether that's contracted providers, whether it's medical specialty societies, whether it's health systems who have data that they want to submit to the association for review. So then we can incorporate it into the annual process that we do when we review medical technologies. And so when I say we're learning, part of the excitement here is about how do we create a system where the reviews that we can do can start to learn from some of the data that's created from now very robust registries that are being put into place at some of these institutions and others. So with that, I'll stop.
And starting, I guess, picking up off of that point, one of the interesting things about this panel is this is really the community. It's very nice to see Stanford and UCSF and the other academic medical centers adopting precision medicine, but if you look at the patient volumes, it's relatively small. And here we have the community sitting up here really making a commitment to precision medicine. And I guess starting off again, Suzanne, with you, do you see that manifesting in the work that you're doing? Do you see an increase in molecular testing in specialty drugs, or is that coming across on the payer side?
Yeah, so in the work that we do, my team manages a compendium of reviews that we update on an annual basis, and that compendium is about 460 reviews in size. Over 100 of those deal with genetics and genetic testing. So it is a huge amount of the work that we do, and on a monthly basis as we add new reviews, as plans come to us and say, we need additional information on these technologies, by and large, they're genetics and genomics related. I think one of the things strategically that really ends up being a challenge for payers is that, the system is built off of codes, right? So you charge based on code, and when you start to really think about, and we think a lot in our shop about how does precision medicine really alter word medical policy. What does medical policy mean in a world of precision medicine? You start to think about having to create a process and a system where you really are looking at an individual, not looking at one individual technology. And it's a challenge, given the way things are set up now, given the way Blue plans have to operationalize their medical policies. So we're learning, we're thinking about it. And I think there are some areas that lend itself to sort of a more holistic approach, and then others where it's more challenging.
And Lincoln, you've been quite successful over the past few years, not just rolling out precision medicine technology and getting it adopted by the oncologists within Intermountain, but you've also been able to work with payers, both Select Health, which is the Intermountain plan, and others, to achieve some amount of coverage. Can you talk about what that process looked like? Did you benefit by having your own payer? Or how did you go about getting payers to really reimburse the technology that you were using?
It's a big challenge, and it's been, I think it's one of the major stumbling blocks that's present for any organization that's trying to implement precision medicine for clinical purposes. And when we first started, being able to get drugs approved for patients was difficult, and we still run into some challenges. Having our own payer at Intermountain Healthcare as part of this broad payer and provider picture actually didn't help that much. Is there anyone from Select Healthcare? And that's good, in my opinion. I actually think that if you're under the same umbrella, that doesn't mean you have to hedge on your principles. And Select Health, our payer side, has not done that. They have acted independently as they should. But now, as we've been able to generate some outcomes data and demonstrate that that's our primary interest initially, is in understanding whether patient outcomes are the same, better, or worse compared to standard therapies, then we've found good success with payers, not only on the technology/testing side, but also on the drug approval side. And I think that's been the key, and I think that was something of a theme that we heard from all of the panelists, that to really implement precision medicine, there has to be some kind of attention to data generation. And we live in this era of static healthcare resources, which means we have an obligation to determine whether novel approaches yield better patient outcomes. And if they don't, then we should not be implementing them. And that's a principle that we have really tried to stick to. And we've done that by really monitoring patient outcomes and trying to understand whether this cohort of patients does better than when we use a standard approach. And if they don't do better, then we can't justify implementing these technologies. So far, it looks like actually patients can do better.
And Tom and Dax, you're both in an environment that is in many ways diverse. You have lots of community hospitals. You're, in the case of Tom, Providence affiliation, you've got a very large coverage area. Catholic Health, obviously a very large coverage area. So how are you thinking about the payer angle and the reimbursement angle, especially given the size of your organizations and the fact that you don't have, at least today, your own payer?
Want to give it a first shot?
But I think that our situation is interesting in that it is rather heterogeneous across the system. As I said at the outset, the Swedish Cancer Institute is effectively a research practice, so we're focused on using molecular phenotypic data to not only prioritize standard therapies, but just as importantly, to match patients to appropriate clinical trials. And my point about this is that clinical trials matching, not entirely, but largely, is a regional activity. And I would argue, in most cases, the payer situation is also regional. So that in the greater Seattle area, for example, our major third-party payers are effectively the Blues. And again, we're in discussions to collaborate by sharing our data experience in exchange for getting support, at least for the front end, which is the cost of the panel. The truth is we all know that the real challenge in terms of expense is the back end, the one that relates to drugs. On the other hand, our Oregon region and province has its own plan. And similar to Lincoln's situation, they're in conversations with their own plan, with themselves, to try to get some consensus as to how to cover. But my point is that I think the payer situation is, for large systems, going to be a regional issue. I should mention that because of that, we also have a regional approach to molecular tumor points.
I think it's an interesting point that you raise in terms of the research focus, the academic focus that your system has. We're trying to juggle an environment where we have some sites that are capable of delivering phase 1 trials, other sites that have never done meaningful research before, and create a platform that is equally suited to each of those. And the reality, of course, is both in terms of the testing and how you use the information is going to differ substantially depending on what your focus is. For us, and this goes back to Suzanne's point earlier, for us it was the chaos. It was the chaos in this domain that drives us to try and address and bring some order and structure to the application of these technologies. If you've been awake during most of the day and you've tried to assimilate the information that's been put forth at this conference, it's overwhelming. And it certainly is overwhelming for the typical clinician in a community setting who's having enough difficulty keeping up with standard of care, new drug approvals, new combinations, new toxicities, and new paradigms. All these targeted agents, very different in nature than our historical chemotherapies. And so from front end to back end, I would consider this a very chaotic, very dynamic landscape where, simple choices like what test, how many genes is it going to be covered are extraordinarily challenging. Not to mention going to the back end where you get a report and you're trying to prioritize and determine how you maximize the actionability of the information that you're getting. So that, I think, really is a critical function, and I think it's exciting to hear that organizations now are making that commitment to learn from these experiences, not just to make them available, but to really learn from those lessons that are available in the community.
And how are you all thinking about really the evidence generation process? Because I think one of the themes that we've heard is that we're still in the early stages of generating the evidence that we need to really scale precision medicine to every community provider. Lincoln, I think one of the things you were talking about is understanding when it's really clinically impactful to use precision medicine. So where are we at in gathering the clinical data and the genomic data and the outcomes information to drive the development of evidence for the clinical utility of precision medicine?
Well, I think we're in early days, and I think there are a couple of major challenges that we all face, and one of those is interpretation. And it's one thing to perform a panel of genes, test a panel of genes, and whether you do that in-house or ship it out and have it done externally, at the end of the day, what the organ provider receives is a report that has a list of genes, and you alluded to this, John, and then it's up to that individual provider to decide how to implement that or whether to implement it. And the fact is that for the majority of medical oncologists in this country, to receive a result that lists 5 or 10 genes and the specific variant in that gene that was found in that patient's tumor reads like Greek. And unfortunately, the vast majority of medical oncologists are not trained to think about the genomic findings that are specific to their patient's tumor, let alone how to act upon that clinically. And so one way that we've tried to overcome this, and Tom Brown has done the same with Swedish, is to implement a molecular tumor board, and that eases some of the strain of interpretation. And so a molecular tumor board can help an individual provider think about what does this list of variants really mean, and how could I act upon it clinically? Is there a clinical trial I should be thinking about? Is there some other targeted therapy approach that I can consider? So that's one aspect, and then I think the second aspect is how do I overcome the problem of N equals 1? And every patient's tumor, we constantly hear about how no two cancers are alike, and we're finding that that's absolutely true. And so just because two patients are both 65 years old and have stage 4 lung cancer does not mean that they'll have the same genomics or even close to it. And so one one patient with stage 4 lung cancer will have a different genomic profile than a seemingly identical patient. And so how do we overcome that n=1 for each patient? And I think the answer is, as you alluded to, we need to aggregate data into large data sets. And as we do that, we will get smarter about knowing which list of genomic variants will equal responses and which do not, and our molecular tumor boards will get smarter. And it probably means we're going to have to act together on institutional levels to have big data sets.
And Suzanne, how do you feel about the molecular tumor board as articulated as a quasi-evidence review body within the medical system? Is that comforting? Is that scary from a payer angle? How do you feel about that?
Well, I grew up with an oncologist as a dad, and has probably sat in the back of a lot of tumor boards in my life. So it's not a, I mean, it's a practice that's been going on in multiple specialties over time. I think anytime we can leverage the experience of the most experienced people in our practice, that's a good thing. And I appreciate, I think collaboration is what's key here. This does require, for all of the reasons that Lincoln just highlighted, incredibly large sets of data. And in order to amass that kind of data to make people review evidence for a living more certain, and to make clinicians who are having to make decisions with their patients more certain, we will need to figure out not only how you collaborate and collect all that data, but how you find the right people to manage and interpret that data. And then on the back end, how you get that data out of the health system and correctly into the hands of people like my group to review it and now update the information that we have, right? And then one step more to create a feedback loop back to the health system, right? So that it really does become a learning process where all the data that's collected eventually ends back up in the hands of those clinicians so that they can implement, better medicine based on the collective knowledge.
And Tom, at Swedish, you've been doing quite a bit of not just thinking, but work in pulling together data from different types of systems so that you can set up something like this. Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of conceptualize pulling the information together to power some of the work that you're doing with HiCore, and really how you thought about setting up, this evidence review and HEOR program procedure that's
Well, underlying our approach is again the concept that I think everyone's alluding to, that in this realm of uncertainty, we want to be transparent, we want to be disciplined in recording what we're doing. Suzanne made some very important comments about molecular tumor boards. Our mode of doing these is to focus on curated evidence. Some of that curated evidence comes from outsourced sources, in our case, N1. But in addition, we put the cases in the context of larger data sets that are available, TCGA being a prime example. And so that, the concept of population health and personalized medicine, these are actually very compatible. To consider the individual in front of you in the context of a very healthy data set, which in my mind is what Suzanne was alluding to. So over time, again, what we're focused on is recording as carefully as we can how this data, molecular phenotypic data, soon biologically phenotypic data, as we talked about today, is applied to the decision points. So each time a therapeutic decision is made to start something, to stop something, or to never give something, which is, as we all know, clinicians is sometimes just as important, if not more so. That's recorded and then reflected upon. In terms of for example, we do have an initial reimbursement experience that we're hoping to report on in Australia. And it goes something like, of course, CMS at this point isn't recognizing gene panels for reimbursement. There are codes that might be applied, but there's no reimbursement. On the other hand, for third-party payers, our experience is that approximately 20% of the third-party payers in the Pacific Northwest are covering our focused gene panel and similar panels. Again, this is a moving target. We think the best approach to the third-party payers is to work in collaboration, to share data, and to also, in that context, have some sharing of the risk.
And Dax, with over 100 hospitals from coast to coast, you certainly have a lot of patient data at your disposal. What are you thinking about in terms of pulling that together? What do you think are the barriers to an organization like yours in sharing that information and leveraging that for the community good? And how are you thinking about that over the next years?
Sure. It's a great question and one we've been trying to tackle for a period of time. So when you look at the evolution, you look back 7 or 8 years in the CHI history, and you had 40 some odd cancer centers practicing entirely independent of one another. So for us, a first step was making a commitment to one source of truth, which often is the registry. So we've united all of those registries across the country, so we actually have line of sight to our patient population for the first time ever in real time. We've now obviously moved beyond that, and like my peers on the stage here, have committed to the development of an oncology data warehouse, and that data warehouse has multiple applications from business functions to research functions and other ways. But I think for us, a lot of the future is in partnerships. It's the opportunity to leverage our someplace between 35,000 and 40,000 analytic cases with like-minded systems that are pursuing similar endeavors. It's the ability to use what used to be exclusively a community network and now involves a number of academic partners, Creighton University, the University of Louisville, Baylor College of Medicine, and to ask how that community academic relationship, how the information we're gathering can be used within those academic environments to advance just the questions that we're asking here. So I think for us, this is an exercise in finding the right partners, the right opportunities to advance the science.
And there is someone with a microphone, so if you have a question and raise your hand, someone will come over to you. While that's happening, I'll ask another question, which is, can you talk about what you feel are the number 1 or 2 challenges that you have over the next 12 months, and what your plans are to tackle that in precision medicine? Let's start with Lincoln. Put you on the spot.
Yeah. I think continuing to generate the body of evidence that precision medicine positively impacts patients is a challenge for all of us to take up. And I think as we partner together to generate the kind of evidence that payers need to see, that providers need to see, to warrant broad implementation of genomics for patients in multiple medical disciplines, not just cancer. That's one of our goals and initiatives. We can do that through a variety of means. And I think a second major challenge is this N of 1 challenge that I alluded to before, where we need to have a larger body of data so that each patient is not so distinct and unique that we don't want to do it. We want to have an N of several, so we have at least seen some of these cases before and know how to act upon them. I think working with an entity like Syapse is one way that we anticipate being able to consolidate large data sets from multiple institutions to the benefit of board providers and patients.
I think we're still more foundational than that. This started a number of months ago, and one of the first things that we did was to go to our clinician community, and again, a wide array of employee doctors, independent doctors, contractor doctors, and ask them, what do you see as the value of precision medicine? Is this important? Is it here to stay? Is it a lot of hoo-ha and underperforming? And what are, so for us, part of that answer was there wasn't enough value in it for the average community physician. the probability of getting a test and actually getting it paid for, and then getting information that impacted patient care, was still seen as a foundational barrier to the average community physician. So I think for us, it's leveraging who we are as an organization, the different elements of the organization, whether it's our relationship with payers, whether it's our research effort, to look at that information, to be able to define a path forward for our clinicians in which precision medicine technologies can be applied appropriately and actually can impact care with enough frequency that they see it as valuable.
So I think 4 things come to mind in terms of challenges, and they've all been alluded to in some way. The first, and in maybe no particular order, is the physician comfort level. And you know, someone who's spent decades literally in university environments, I can tell you that the level of anxiety, the level of challenge in terms of applying genomic information to the care of the patient is equally seen in academic university environments as it is in the community. So I think that's an issue, and again, we try to approach this through molecular tumor boards, through the provision of robust sets of evidence-based data. So that would be one issue. The other is, of course, reimbursement, which again, it's not just the third-party payers. I think it's about collaboration across maybe unusual boundaries to include the federal government as well as third-party payers, that is private third-party payers. I think that the issue of scale, whenever we've, I think, all shown in our own way the feasibility, but how does that really scale up in a way that's sensible? Lastly, I would say that for us, again, as a research practice, what we're trying to do with modern medical oncology, really being predicated on clinical research, is give patients access to clinical trials. So we're trying to work across barriers regionally. We're trying to, in our matching of clinical trials, not only consider our clinical trials, but clinical trials from systems throughout our region, so that patients can be referred to the trial that is hopefully closest to them and most relevant to their unique phenotype. And again, we're getting some important traction in that regard. I think there's a collaborative spirit that's demonstrated on this panel as well.
So I think the 2 challenges that I will highlight are first, reduction in uncertainty and consistency of approach. So when I talk about reduction of uncertainty, there are 2, I think, fundamental things that the association has as priorities this year. First, we're going to start working with medical specialty societies to try and gain some market-based stakeholder approval and agreement on the scope of the evidence review that we will undertake. So on the front end of that review, we have some general marketplace agreement that we're looking at the right patients, we're looking at the right interventions and comparators, and that we're looking at the clinically relevant outcomes. So that's a big priority for us this year. The second around reducing uncertainty is trying to continue to create situations where we can engage and get additional data submissions from stakeholders. So historically, our practice has been to review only reports that have been published in the peer-reviewed literature. I think one of the things that we will start to visit this year is this idea around real-world evidence, and probably on one very small end of real-world evidence, which are around how do you incorporate reports from very well-curated registries. Many of those registries have a peer review process that would rival any at a top journal, but what they produce is not a JAMA article, they produce a report from that registry, so we'll start looking at that. The second thing I highlighted was consistency of approach. I think that it is incredibly challenging in the market where you have a number of evidence review groups, where you have payers, both private and government, who are who seem to be all making decisions based on different scopes of evidence and potentially different requirements, in part because those requirements are not made transparent. So we will be participating and working closely with some other evidence review groups to try and align the approach that we take and then make that approach transparent so that people can actually start to see the target that we're asking them to meet.
I see there was one question, well, there are two questions there. We'll take them both very quickly. I want to start further back first. Yep, go ahead.
So, in this conversation, especially with the earlier panel, what happens if a patient has molecular profiling? Maybe it's paid for by literature, maybe not. And then there's a recommendation for a treatment that's clearly off-label, and there isn't a clinical trial available to them.
How do you adjudicate those? Does it have to go to a molecular tumor board? Who's the patient's advocate to get a treatment in that situation?
Lincoln, do you want to take that?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. And we've run into that. That clearly happens. There's a whole bucket of patients who have molecular profiling. They clearly have an actionable alteration. Within our system, we'll see that happen, and the molecular tumor board will even come to a consensus interpretation about what type of targeted therapy could potentially benefit that patient. And if we don't have a clinical trial for that patient, or if that patient doesn't qualify for the trial, then they're kind of in this limbo situation where they, how do you get the drug? And so what we've done to address that actually is built an entire infrastructure, a whole team around going then and working directly with the payer to provide the evidence that is available in that realm, whether it's early phase 1 data or whatever it may be, and just talking directly, going through an appeals process with the payer to get the drug approved, and in some cases having to work directly with the manufacturer if there are repeated denials from the payer. And so that's another avenue. But that's a difficult situation. I'd be interested to hear others' experience.
And while I would certainly agree with Lincoln's comments, the first comment I would make is we have started and have continued not to do balance billing. So on the front end, in terms of the NGS panel cost, we do not ask the patient to pay if the third-party payer declines. Obviously, that's not a sustainable model in the long run. Is what scales up. The other comment I would make, and I hope that Rich Shilsky is in the room, the Chief Medical Officer for ASCO. I think an important initiative on the back end, so to speak, is similar to or personified by ASCO's TAPR initiative, which will provide in a controlled setting with pharma contributing relevant agents to respective targets the ability to routinely access drugs with a certain genomic profile. I think the real question with an effort like that is how scalable is it, and what other entities around the country, around the world, can also develop similar platforms. Because clearly, as we say, it's the back end of the process that is most problematic from the medical financial standpoint.
And I just build on that real quickly. I think that's a great point. We're also seeing the research landscape change, aren't we? We moved away from the traditional methodology. We see lots of presentations as to why the traditional drug development pathway is no longer sustainable from a financial perspective, that it delays bringing of cutting-edge therapies to the community. So things like TAPR, things like MATCH, these trials are ongoing studies, and some of them there are multiple iterations. And you're talking about the potential to treat patients over extended periods of time in the context of clinical trial. That's a really significant paradigm shift where the practice of oncology, where we've always considered research to be important, but the practice of oncology is really becoming increasingly research-based. It'll be interesting to see if that trend continues. It's certainly supported by precision medicine efforts.
Well, we could continue all day, but our fearless conference organizers are making the axe. So thank you so much for your attention.